Welcome to episode 48 of the Hunt Backcountry podcast. As usual, this is Mark and Steve's online as well. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing fantastic, man.
Good. So we are going to hop straight into this one and talk about Steve's recent mule deer success. But before we get to that, just wanted to, as always, thank you guys for not only listening, but submitting your feedback. Wanted to just check out iTunes. I just checked. We're almost at 200 reviews, which is super awesome. Would love to see some more, and they help out a ton. So I randomly selected a reviewer to get some Exo swag, and it happened to be the screen name Solo Female Hunter, which I thought was pretty BA, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead and email us to podcast@exomountaingear.com, Solo Female Hunter, and we will get you some Exo swag. And listeners, as always, if you're interested in not only submitting your feedback, which we value, but interested in getting your name in the hat for the Exo giveaways, leave your review in iTunes or submit your comments, questions, or feedback to us at podcast@exomountaingear.com. And one thing I just noticed, which I think is actually new, is within iTunes, if you have or use the iTunes app to listen to this or just have it in general, you can actually search for the Hunt Backcountry podcast, click the reviews, and you can actually submit your review right from the phone, which I think is new. Before you had to do it on the computer, and it was kind of a pain in the butt. So if you have the iTunes or the podcasts app in your phone, especially if you have an iPhone, of course, go ahead and leave that review right within the phone. So thanks as always for doing that, guys. So yeah, Steve and I just wanted to debrief on your hunt. Dude, I was like so pumped when I saw the pics because, you know, hearing your stories about, you know, you being pretty excited, like, you know, about the tag that you had, the unit you were headed into, but then a few scouting trips essentially turned up dry, right?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I definitely picked some off-the-wall spots on my scouting trips, hoping that I was going to, you know, just stumble across a big old buck. You know, anybody that knows me well knows I'm far from a trophy hunter, but thought it'd be kind of cool to shoot a nice big buck, and I thought, you know, this might be an opportunity to do it. And, yeah, both scouting trips, you know, unfortunately I was only make two, you know, just freaking crazy busy with life and work and other stuff going on. But got out twice and struck out both times.
Yeah. So you essentially not only weren't seeing quality of deer in terms of looking for big bucks, you were just not turning up deer, period, right?
Yeah, in two scouting trips I saw a 2-point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was official strikeout there.
Yeah. That's kind of like that feast or famine, though, as you mentioned, when you're thinking off the norm and trying to look in secret spots. Like, that's part of the game, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I scoured Google Earth for a long time, just trying to find some remote pocket where a big old buck had a chance to grow old, you know, and hiked into the two different places I'd picked out, you know, and just no luck. So
that means
that's how it goes.
That means opening day, you've kind of done plan A, plan B in terms of scouting. Were you returning to those areas? Did you just totally write them off after not seeing deer? Like, what was your not only strategy, but frame of mind going into opening day?
Definitely, I had written them off, and I say that not because I hadn't seen deer, but when I kind of, you know, halfway into both of those scouting trips, when I realized, well, there's not a bunch of deer in here, I'm not seeing anything, you know, I really started looking for sign at that point. Like, okay, is there a bunch of tracks? You know, any one of those spots, if I had seen a lot of, you know, big buck tracks crossing a saddle or something like that, then maybe I probably would have gone back there, just hoping, you know, I had missed them that day. But I had not seen, you know, hadn't seen deer and hadn't seen a whole lot of sign of them. So that was definitely the deciding factor not to go back to either one of those spots.
So did it, once you were in there, I mean, obviously you did Google Earth, but once you got in there, did it make sense that deer weren't there? Or did it seem like it had, like, the habitat, the terrain, the features that could have supported, you know, a buck hanging out there?
It definitely, and I don't know if this applies to other states. I'm assuming it does, kind of for the most part. They were very elky spots, and I was kind of hunting these really rocky tops to elk country. Okay. And so I saw a lot of elk. You know, the very first trip we saw quite a few bulls. Actually, a friend of mine went with me. Yeah, so it seems like any place I've ever had that's good elk country is usually not good deer country as far as seeing a number of deer. But I kind of knew that going in, and I a place I used to elk hunt, we'd see one buck every September, but that buck was always a giant. The biggest buck I ever seen in my life was in a place that, I used to elk hunt. So that's kind of what I was shooting for, just hoping to get lucky. And I'd never gone into that type of country really looking for bucks. I was just kind of scouting for elk or something. So I was optimistic that I was going to find something, but obviously didn't.
Yeah. So take us into like kind of your process then for breaking down, okay, 2 scouting trips, dry. What do you like? How are you developing your plan for opening morning then? Are you trying to like return to a more traditional, like,
for
not,
sure. Yeah, I had a spot picked out on Google Earth and then maps, just going back and forth. That Idaho Fish and Game Hunt Planner has a really good map resource. Really bouncing back and forth between that, looking at trails and access. And my plan going into opening day was I went in the day before. I wanted to go in the 2 days before, but my wife's baby shower was that day, and I had about 8,000 honey-to-dos, so I couldn't get out of town. But anyway, so yeah, I left that day, and my plan going into it was I needed to cover as much country as I possibly could. So I had kind of laid out my route of Sunday afternoon. I got in there, hiked in, and there was a kind of an offshoot canyon that was really steep climb getting up into it. But it was one of those, just looked like a big buck could live there. Just really good looking country, but a real small, secluded canyon. Hiked up in there Sunday afternoon and sat there until dark. And it was actually like this, it kind of blew me away. I remember telling Lenny it was like a utopia of does and fawns and cows and calves. Like this little tiny canyon, like a mile by 3/4 of a mile, had 50 deer and elk in it. But all like does with 2 fawns running around, and cows and calves. There's one little 2-point and a little raghorn bull running around in there. And I was like, I actually, I saw so many deer in there. I was like, I don't know if I should leave this or not. Like, there's a good chance there might be, there's not going to be a bomber buck hanging out with all these, but there might be a nice 4-point. And ultimately, I made the decision. It got dark. I didn't see anything other than that little 2-point buck. Hiked out. Hiked kind of this trail system I was on, made a big loop, and kind of came around to this peak. And from Google Earth, I knew from that peak that I could literally see, 4 miles around me. So in the morning, I could wake up. The place I really wanted to look into was directly east. So I was really worried about the sun. And it was one of those mornings, sometimes we never sleep in, but we basically get up as it's glassing light and just make a cup of coffee and sit there and start glassing right away. I don't know. I was up about an hour before, got my tripod, my binos tripod mounted, just waiting until I could just barely see so I could start picking apart the hillside, because I knew the second that sun would come up that it was pretty much game over for glassing across the canyon. Unfortunately, I woke up and it was super smoky and I couldn't see across the canyon regardless. So I was just kind of got up and I could see this little bowl below me. Saw 3 bulls in it, and which kind of discouraged me, because I was like, if there's 3 bulls right here, there's probably not going to be a deer within a few hundred yards. And just scoured and scoured and scoured. And I guess I'm jumping forward a little bit here, but the night before, up to this peak, it's a hefty climb. I think it was like 2,700 feet or something like that. And about 500 feet into the climb, I came across a spring, and I'm sitting there. I got a full 3-liter bladder and no other water, and I'm just debating, should I fill up? I really don't want to pack a bunch of extra water all the way to the top of this, and I debated not to. And
trying
somehow
to go all Brian Barney on us.
yeah. I got not quite crazy as Brian with his 32 ounces a day, which still is crazy to me. That's some serious discipline. I pretty much have the philosophy of I drink as much water as I possibly can. I don't try to conserve. I do a lot better when I'm really well hydrated. But yeah, so I elected not to get water, hoping I'd come across a spring towards the top. I couldn't tell on Google Earth if there was any springs. There's a couple of green patches, and I was hoping there was going to be water. So I'm in the dark, kind of stumbling around, and I can't find any water, and I get up to the peak. And typical of like the last episode, we were talking about shelters. I hike around for good 45 minutes trying to find a good flat spot to pitch the bivy sack and the Jimmy's tarp, and finally found a place literally on the peak. I mean, it's a really steep everywhere angle. I mean, I had like this little 5-foot top to this peak, and right there was a deer bed actually right next to a little piece of brush. And so I pitched the tarp in there, and I didn't make a mountain house that night because I was trying to conserve water, because I knew studying maps that there was this ridge I could jump on. It was about 2.5 miles, and I could see an actual like little pond and a spring coming out of the bottom of that pond, just up that ridge. So I knew I could go get water the next day. But in my head, I'm playing around, well, if I see a buck, the other direction of that, I need to make sure I have enough water. So I didn't make a mountain house, just kind of ate one of my protein bars, woke up, and I did elect to make some coffee in the morning. And I got the coffee. It's really just, I'm sitting on this really steep spot, and anybody can relate that's had their jet boil in steep, rocky country, and I'm like trying to make this little flat spot to set it so I can actually boil the water. And I kind of dig out a little spot, and I put the pot down and get the water boiling, and I go to glassing, and then I hear the water boil, and I go to turn it off, and right as I turn the nozzle, I'd actually set the fuel canister on a little rock, and the thing just tipped over. And oh man, I was so pissed off. I was son of a, just freaking. I got, water's scarce, but I just love my coffee. I just had like a half freaking thing of jet boil, or 8 ounces of water in there, and I dumped that out, and I was pissed. So I didn't get my morning coffee. I was like, oh, this is a great start to the day.
I'm shocked you killed a deer after not having coffee. Yeah. Knowing you, I mean,
how could I do that? So yeah, that morning, I think it was about glassing light at 6:15 or something like that. About 9 o'clock, it's just super smoky. The sun had risen. I can't see across the canyon. It's smoky all around me. I mean, I literally can really glass just kind of this, 200 to 500 yards below me in this little bowl.
Really? Is that all?
That was it. Yeah. Wow. And I just picked that apart like crazy. It was another thing to mention was it was a full moon, or it was 2 days before a full moon. So I was fully going into that morning, not like, pessimistic. Like, it's full moon. There probably any big buck's going to be, bedded down well before light. But also knowing that, I knew that if they had bedded down, that they're probably going to get back up about 9, 10 a.m., So anyways, at about 9 o'clock, I hadn't seen anything. The smoke didn't look like it was getting any better. And I was like, well, this ridge that I'm on that I can work towards that spring, it's a good steep ridge, both sides. So I was just like, I'm just going to start working my way down this ridge and just kind of, just slowly hiking, being patient, just kind of glassing into the little pockets down on either side. Hopefully I'll catch a buck bedded or get out of his bed to feed. And about a mile into it,
so let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Because we got questions on this previously. I think actually it was after a mule deer episode we had with Robbie Denning, and he talked so much about the different styles of elk hunting. You just hunting. Talking about, of deer hunting. You can tell what's on my brain. You just talked about, hiking slow and kind of glassing. Like, give us an idea of pace. I mean, because we're clearly not talking about still hunting at this point, but kind of give us an idea of, I mean, you mentioned you covered a mile. How frequently are you stopping to kind of peer with the binos? What kind of time, if you had to guesstimate, did it take you to cover that mile? Kind of break us down, your technique through that.
Yeah, to give you an exact time, and it was roughly a mile. It was 10 a.m. when I spotted the bucks across the other side, so it had taken me an hour to go a mile.
Okay.
Normally you're hiking, that's 15 minutes, 20 minutes to go a mile.
Yeah.
Yeah. So about a third of pace of hiking, and basically that was kind of moving from little mini glassing points on this ridge, whether, depending on which side I was looking at, I was just kind of slowly working, get to a point where it looks like I could see down, down the slope one way or the other, sit there, look behind every tree, jump across the ridge, which, so it's only like 10 feet wide, so I kind of walk across, glass down the other side, and just kind of kept leapfrogging over the ridge as I went along.
Okay.
And I was actually seeing deer tracks everywhere, so I was super encouraged. Very, very optimistic that I was going to come across something at any point. Whether it was a doe or whatever. And So yeah, I had done that, and it was about a mile into it, and finally I could see across the canyon. And I knew, looking at the maps, this is. Let me jump back one quick section. And the importance of scouting from that peak I was at that morning. Obviously I knew this going blind. I felt like I had no opportunity to go blind into an area. But that peak I was glassing from, it was really kind of a convex shape, right? Where it was, kind of a slope to it, a curve to it, where from the peak you really couldn't see down very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I had gone about half a mile down that ridge. It was kind of a low point, and I could see back into that country I was glassing that morning, like 1,000 times better than I could actually that morning, And I was super bummed. I was like, man, there legitimately could have been a buck right below me, and I wouldn't have seen it because I couldn't see all these little crevices of the country, Because there was a lot of, even though it was a small area, there was a lot of little pockets and kind of rolly, benchy pockets of trees, stuff like that. And I just remember thinking, I was like, man, if I had scouted this place, I would have known to be right here this morning, versus being up on that peak, because it was just a way better glassing area. So something to keep in mind is just, it's just kind of frustrating going blind into an area. It really decreases your odds, I think, significantly.
Yeah.
So I'm working along the ridge, 10 a.m. I knew there's a spring across the other side, and that just goes back to really studying the maps. Just showed this little tiny, blue streak going down the mountain. And I pulled up the binos and I look, and I'm kind of just scanning up and down the spring, and all of a sudden I see a buck off to the left side. And it's from where I stood to where that buck was 2 miles, as the crow flies across the canyon. So it's a big, big canyon. And then I think about 2,300 feet down and back up. He's basically eye level with me.
Yeah. And what are you glassing with at this point?
Just my binos. Yeah, put them on a tripod.
And they're just 10s?
Yeah, 10 by 42s, SLCs. My favorite pair ever. So I basically was walking along that ridge with my binos on the tripod, and I'd stop and rest it against my hip or something when I was glassing down below me. It's just such a good, stable way to look, and you just see so much more when you're not hand holding your binoculars.
Yeah.
Glassed the buck and realized, it was a buck, 2 miles, the smoke, I couldn't really tell. I just knew it was a buck, so I pulled the spotter up right away. I'm sitting there looking at him, and I realized he's just a little 2-point. He was actually 2 by 3. So I was kind of bummed, and then I was like, well, I was just about ready to get walking again, and I was like, just something told me, like, just sit here for another couple minutes. Usually these bucks are in pairs. And sure enough, 50 yards in front of him, this other buck was working, and there's a bunch of dead white oak trees, and he was kind of working through them, and the sun was shining on him every little bit as he was kind of going into the shadows, and I could just see a good frame. I just knew, man, that's a shooter buck. I don't care what he is, he's got a good, he's tall and he's wide. So basically I sat there and I watched them, and for an hour they just kind of slowly fed up, and I could never get a good look at them. It's really hazy. I mean, just really tough glassing conditions. Eventually they kind of go into this big area of these dead white pines, and I don't see them for 15 minutes or something, and I assume that they bedded down, and I basically wrote them off. I was like, well, they've gone into that pine, these white pines. I don't know where they're at. Kind of studying the country above them. I didn't think that I could get over there, necessarily look down into them, and have a good vantage point. So I was like, well, there's a good buck over there. That's great to know for tomorrow. That's one thing I think that's really critical with that mule deer hunting is you can't ever, just kind of go for broke. You can't take a risk. You have to be very calculated in what you do if you want to be continually successful.
Yeah. So you're just kind of putting him in your back pocket. You know?
Exactly. I mean, I was like, all right, that's a great plan B. Tomorrow I'll be, right where I glassed him from was a place I could pitch the tent. I actually marked it on the GPS, like tent.
Yeah.
I can come back here, stumble my way back in the dark tonight if I have to, and I'll be right here in the morning. And hopefully it's not smoky, and I can see him first thing tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
Make an all or nothing move over towards them, you could be just busting up that whole canyon, right?
Exactly. I don't know what's between me and him. There's a lot of good country. I'm seeing deer sign. I'm in no rush to get over there.
Yeah.
Well, I got up, moved, and then probably 100 yards later, just with my binos, I glassed back, and I actually saw the buck kind of cross the hill real quick and move up to this lone dead white pine tree, and I was like, holy crap, like looking at it, he was right at the base of this cliff. I knew if I could just get to this cliff, it was going to be a shot, and I was just like, holy crap, okay, this changes everything. And I sat there, pulled the spotter out, where I said cross this little opening, but he bedded under this pine tree, and I couldn't see. There's a bunch of dead limbs everywhere, and I really couldn't get a look at what he was. And I was kind of on the fence of, it was probably 10, 20 or something like that. I'm not sure. And I was really on the fence of going over there or not. It was a long ways away. I think running the ridge from where I was at to him was about 4.5 miles. Wow. 2.5 to the saddle, another 2. Basically, I had to climb up to this peak 1,000 feet and then drop down onto him. I knew it was going to take some time, and I was worried about, the bed, that buck bedding in the same spot and staying there, because I knew once I kind of got too far away, there was no way I was going to see him again until I was 200 yards away. So I was really on the fence, and where he bedded, the sun was actually on his butt. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I know he's going to get up and rebed again, and you just never know as a mule deer guy if that bed is going to be 5 feet away, or we've seen him get up and feed and move 100, 200, 300 yards and rebed again. So I was really kind of like, crap, I'm not sure. And luckily, the little buck that was with him went and bedded right above him behind the tree. And through the spotter, you really couldn't tell, but there was just, once he bedded there, I was like, oh man, there's a big, flat, nice spot right there. So that was basically like the trigger that I knew that bigger buck, when the sun hit him, he was going to get up, kick that little buck out of his bed and take his place. And I was like, well, it's game on.
Nice.
So it's like, here we go. I got a lot of country to cover. I wasn't really sure how long it was going to take me. And I knew I needed to go get water. So I basically, kind of hiked pretty fast pace, but still very diligent working across that ridge, because there was a lot of deer tracks on that ridge. And I felt like any second, I could jump something up or something. So I didn't want to be just head down hiking blindly. I've definitely a lesson I feel like I learned early on. I used to just be just kind of stupid, basically. Just put my head down and hike, trying to get from point A to point B, and you bust up animals. So I was definitely moving fast, but diligent, trying to glass and pay attention and make sure I didn't jump up something, that was like an easy buck feeding down below me 50 yards.
Right.
Get over to the water, pump some water real quick, and then I had to basically cross to a saddle, climb up to that peak, and I dropped down, and all said and done, it was just over 3 hours to get over there. And I got...
You said it was probably 4.5-ish miles the way you went?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, well, no, I take that back. It was 4.5 from where I camped.
Okay.
Because I'd drawn a path on Google Earth from where I camped along the ridge up to that other peak and kind of down another saddle.
Yeah.
So it would have been 3.5 from where I glassed them.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. So 3 hours later, I get there, and 200 yards above him, that buck is actually still bedded in the sun. And I was just like, holy crap, I can't believe he's still there.
So the little buck and the big buck were both in the same beds?
No,
or just the big buck was?
There was 2 dead white pine trees, just big old trees, and they're just all basically white now.
Yeah.
With dead limbs hanging all around it. And the bigger buck, the one I shot, was on kind of the south side of it, and the other buck was in between the 2 trees on the kind of north side of the tree.
Okay.
And so the bigger buck was in the shade, or the bigger buck was in the sun, the little buck was in the shade. And I got up there. I was like, man, I can't believe that's crazy. I thought for sure that bigger buck would have gotten up and kicked him out. But like, well, great. It is kind of a pain in the butt because I got that basically little buck. They're only 5 yards apart, but he was going to be in between me and him, and me and the bigger buck.
Yeah.
So I snuck down, and so it was roughly 200 yards. I could see him, and then I dropped off the backside of this little real sharp knife ridge, and just kind of ran right off the peak. Dropped down there, got within 100 yards of the top of the little ridge. Took off my pack, grabbed my Slurpee stalker, put on my extra socks for stalking, and snuck up there. And I popped up, and by the time I popped up, the bigger buck was now on the other side of the tree, which was great. But what was freaking me out is I couldn't find the little buck.
Yeah.
I'm like, how many times have we all been busted by, the doe or the other deer or something standing there? So I was really like scanning everywhere looking for that little buck, and I couldn't find him. So I was super paranoid about that he had maybe like moved up and was like literally within 20, 30 yards of me. I just didn't know him because it was really the only other trees, unless he had gone kind of back towards those trees that they were at that morning. I never did end up seeing that little buck. I don't know where he went. But,
really?
So yeah, right when I popped up on this little knife ridge, I'm glassing down and I could see him, and he was 73 yards away, shoot for. 73 yards, so probably 80-ish. I had basically ended up doing this little leapfrog, back up and over the ridge about 5 times. I'm in my socks. There really wasn't, it was a 2-ish at this time, and the thermals really hadn't kicked up yet for those afternoon winds to kind of make noise. So I'm being super, super quiet, and I keep, I popped over the ridge, not a good spot to sit and wait for him to stand up. So I pop back over, kind of move 10 yards down the ridge, pop over. So I think I did this about 5 times. And I finally got to a point where I could see like this little bit of this is basically the little 2-foot pine tree. It was like, if I could get to that pine tree, that's like going to be the perfect place to sit and wait him out. But I had to literally be a worm through a bunch of dead limbs that were kind of sitting up there.
And dead limbs are so quiet.
Oh yeah. No wind noise and dead limbs. Felt like a scene out of a Matrix movie or something.
Yeah. Trying to avoid hitting
bullets.
the lasers. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm basically on my back, my bow's on my chest, and I'm just kind of slowly sliding down this. I mean, it's steep and rocky. And basically just kind of working my way down. And I only had not even 10 yards to cover, but it probably took me half an hour to get down there. I'd wait for the slightest gust of wind to give me a little bit of cover noise. And I just moved 2 feet, and then just kind of slowly worked my way down and kind of got through all the limbs and got to this little pine tree. And I was grateful to have that pine tree because I basically buried my heels into it, which prevented me from sliding down the mountain, I can't remember the angle, but it was really steep straight down to the buck. So I got there, and range him. He's 55 yards, and he's bedded, facing uphill, kind of towards me. So I could see his head and his butt, and unfortunately, this big pile of dead limbs is covering his vitals. So basically, the waiting game began. I sat there for just over 2 hours, constantly. The whole time I'm sitting there, I'm trying to, when the buck was shaking his head or something and moving, I would try to range some different, stumps and rocks and stuff down there by him in case he got up and fed. I'm trying to plan everything out, just covering every scenario.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in this position, you mentioned how steep it is. You're kind of still on your butt, using your feet hold onto this tree to really keep from moving. I mean, how are you sort of planning to get into a shooting position from here if this buck does stand in and give you an angle?
I was honestly, that was the most thing I was worried about, because
Yeah.
I knew to be able to shoot him, I was going to have to scoot out to the left of this pine tree, and I frankly wasn't sure if I was going to stay there. I thought for sure I was going to slide down like a foot or two, before you kind of stopped your momentum.
Yeah. And
I wasn't sure. Yeah.
Practically, what would your shooting position look like? Are you thinking like try and get one leg up, leave one leg down, like a half kneel? Like what? I mean, it sounds like a difficult.
What I had envisioned, I was really looking for something to put my left foot into that I could get my right knee up and really like have an anchor for my left foot. Okay. So I was kind of like on one knee with that left leg fully extended down the hill.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was picturing.
Yeah, but I just couldn't picture it happening. So I basically I knew I was going to be shooting off my butt, and there was no way around it. There was no way, I could have just stood up where that pine tree was, but there was no way I was going to get away with that movement unless the buck was like straight feeding away from me or something. So it's kind of, so I was definitely planning that all out in my head, that 2 hours just sitting there baking in the sun. You get a lot of time to think and go over all the different scenarios. Anyways, so that's all happening. 2 hours goes by. He gets up, and he stands up, and I'm like amped and ready. He was facing, basically he stood up and he was looking directly at me. And we definitely had like, during those 2 hour periods, he'd just stare my direction for like 10 minutes, and then he'd look away and then stare back, or, I wouldn't dare move a muscle. And, so he stands up and he goes, he kind of starts walking out, and I'm like, okay, here we go, like it's game on. And he stops and turns around and starts walking back into the bed, and I'm like, I was so pissed off.
Tease.
I was like, dude, are you freaking kidding me? Because, at this point, if he walks out and feeds the other way, there's a ton of dead limbs and, that tree, and it's probably going to be a longer shot than I'm going to want. But luckily, he basically went over and just stopped, like right in the perfect spot, and just stood there. And he was actually had a bunch of bugs flying around his head, and he was shaking his head like crazy. So when he was shaking his head, I kept my heels dug into that pine tree and just scooted my butt out about, 2 feet. He hadn't moved distance-wise, so I knew he was 55 yards, shoot for 55. I said had to be 65, 67, something like that. I mean, it's a really steep shot. So I'm sitting on my butt. My heels are dug into the pine tree. I draw back, and I was really worried about my cam and limbs hitting the side of the hill.
Yeah.
Just because I'm sitting on my butt, there's not a whole lot of clearance there. And I'm kind of looking at it, like, I think I got, a little bit of room, and I kind of really straightened my spine as best I could just to get as high away from the ground. And so, I leveled up, put my 50 on his back, my 60 was on his belly, pulled the trigger, and I shot and knew instantly by the sound that it was I hit him. And the buck just went piling off, and rocks were tumbling everywhere, and he ran directly away from me, unfortunately, so I couldn't see him. I could just hear him as the trees were in the way. And at that point, I'm just like, your adrenaline's just pumping like freaking crazy. And,
yeah, absolutely.
It's just, I think how we had kind of talked about that with Russ Meyer about shooting a bear, and he had mentioned just that sitting for so long, and then that instant surge of adrenaline and endorphins, and it's just like it's almost too much to handle. You're just full body shaking.
Right.
So it was. I was absolutely freaking amped. I felt like I made a great shot. I was, in a 55-yard, really steep shot. There's always a little bit of a doubt in your mind, maybe of where did I hit? It sounded good. I didn't get to see him, so.
And how was he angled for the shot?
Basically quartered away.
Yeah, you said he turned, so
he's quartered away. Not, somewhere in between broadside and quartered away, slightly quartered away.
So it's not like you had to aim super far back or anything to get to his vitals.
So I didn't get the satisfaction of seeing him running away and seeing an arrow bouncing out the side. So I really didn't. So I was basically, excited, but you're nervous, and I had to hike back up over to my shoes and my pack, put those on, kind of gave it an hour, ate a snack, went
Tried
back
not
up.
to throw your snack up.
Yeah. Went over to where I shot him. Didn't see any blood initially. I was super bummed, and then I kind of I knew he had ran straight away from me, so I had a good idea of at least like a 20-foot path that he took, because if he'd gone left or right of the tree, I would have seen him. So I kind of went down to this really big, there's all these white rocks everywhere. I was like, oh, I'm just going to go down here and look for blood. And basically instantly, bam, there's blood. And then I followed the blood back up to the tree where I'd shot him, found the front half of my arrow with the broadhead. It's covered in blood. And, at that point, I'm basically freaking amped. Like, all right, I made a great shot. It's got, good blood on it. And I followed the blood trail for probably 100 yards. And then I came across my fletch, the back half of the arrow. And it was it was dark red blood. So I was sitting there trying to decide if I hit kidneys or heart, because it was a really dark blood. And then I came across a spot where it looked like he had bedded, because there was just a big, like, 18-inch pool of blood sitting there. And I was like, I can't believe the buck's not laying right here.
Yeah.
So I saw that, and it's just kind of like, well, crap, this buck was definitely stood here for a while, didn't die. I better just chill out. I've had way too many instances in the past where we rushed something, where patience definitely would have been the better decision to recover an animal. So I was just like, well, you know what? It's I can't remember the time, but I'm gonna wait here for an hour, just to be safe. I was definitely hot. Something I forgot to mention earlier. I mean, it was super, super hot in the 80s, So when I was sitting above that buck for 2 hours, I was just freaking baking the sun. Actually, I had my Chama hoodie, and I'd put the hood on, which made it hotter, but at least it kept the sun off my neck and ears.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm worried about the heat, but I'm more worried about recovering this animal, so I'm just going to sit here. And after about 10 minutes of sitting, I was like, well, let me follow the blood trail back up, because I had missed like 20 yards of it, just to see what it looks like. And I had hiked up the hill 20 yards and kind of followed it in reverse, back up to where I'd found that arrow. And then I looked across the canyon, and bam, there he was. I'm like, just freaking. It's so awkward too on a solo hunt, because it's like the
right, like
you have all these emotions, but you don't have this person to share it with. There's nobody to high five, so you're like high fiving yourself basically. Yeah. It's kind of the whole solo hunt thing is it's kind of like the death hike in a sense of, it's not necessarily a lot of fun when I'm doing it, but I love once it's done, that the process
super rewarding,
that type 2 fun that we talked about.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyways, so the buck was there, and I knew I had a long night cut out for me.
So about what time is it by this point, or like when you reach the buck?
Between 4 and 5.
Okay. So you have, some daylight to get them,
Yeah, I said I got over that buck 10-ish. Noon. What time would it have been? No, 2 o'clock. Saddling for 2 hours is 4. So yeah, between 4 and 5, 4:30-ish probably.
Yeah.
So it's basically between 4 and 5. And I'm a long ways in at this point. It was basically 7.5 miles back out to the rig, because just how I'd worked the country, and I wasn't quite sure how long it was going to take. And basically, you're by yourself, so I quartered them all up. I hang the quarters in some trees, kind of on this little ridge that was like 100 yards away, so the wind was hitting it. Got them all quartered. Got all the meat off the carcass, went over to the quarters I had hanging in the trees, deboned them all, loaded it all up, and started hiking. 7.5 miles, and so many hours later, it was basically midnight, and I got back to the truck.
Wow. So single load out.
Yeah, single load out. It's probably, I'm guessing, 130 pounds. I basically had bow strapped to the pack, all my gear, the meat, the cape, and the horns. So it was a heavy pack.
Yeah. And you had a decent amount of gear. You weren't necessarily planning on being there one night, right? You had 3-4 days.
Oh yeah. I had a bunch of food with me. I really overpacked on food for some reason. I was half tempted to take it all out of the wrappers and just throw it on the ground, just to save 5 pounds.
Yeah.
But I ended up just packing it all out with me. Yeah, it was good. I kind of took my time on the hike out. I wasn't in a huge rush or anything.
Not that you really have an alternative to not take your time with that much weight, right? Like you're not going to be speeding out of there.
Right, yeah. No, I'd hike like a couple miles, and then I'd find a big tree and just kind of, sit on, like straddle it, get the weight off my shoulders and off the pack there for a little bit, and then load, and hike a couple miles and sit and wait, and
yeah,
eventually got it out, and then drove home. Got home really, really, really late Monday night, and basically back to work Tuesday morning. So it was kind of like I showed up at the office, and Rob and Tyler are there, and they look at me like, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm tagged out. I'm done, man. I'm good."
Season's over.
So
I got 2 hours of sleep.
It was good. It was. It's actually 3 years in a row now. I've killed a buck opening day, which is just a crazy lucky streak. I doubt that'll continue. It was. Feel like I've been doing something right. Been lucky or good or a little bit of both or something.
Yeah, I mean we've gotten questions about that, when we've posted the buck on social media for sure, and I know that you're humble and not going to say it's all you and that there's a lot of luck involved, and that's certainly true. There's always luck involved in hunting, regardless.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as you kind of mentioned, you have to be doing something right. Like what, in terms of what is in your control, what do you see are the factors that have helped you been successful, opening day 3 years in a row? That's awesome.
I've definitely been, we've talked about this early on in the podcast of like half the reason we want to do this is for you and I to become better hunters, to interview guys and just get better. And I've definitely been on a quest quest might be a strong word, but I've been dedicated to becoming a better hunter. For the last 5 years or so. I knew early on that I was not hunting smart, and I was never afraid to hike hard or hunt hard, but I kind of knew or had a feeling that there was a better, smarter way to do it. I think it's a combination of, and you talk to these awesome hunters that we've had on, like Russ Meyer and Travis Nowotny and Brian Barney, and these guys that go out and just consistently get it done time and time again on public land. And there's a lot of common themes of patience, hard work, and like you said, a little luck applies to it. But there was a great quote I saw on Facebook, and I think I believe it was Thomas Jefferson or something, that was this: "I'm a greater believer in luck, and I find the harder I work, the more I have of it." It's just perfect, because it is. You
create luck to some extent.
You create luck to some extent, yeah. And I think it's being, I was really bad about hiking from A to B. Like, okay, I'm here, I need to get there. I'm not going to see another animal until I get there. I had that mentality early on in my hunting, when I started hunting. And now I definitely, like I said, even though I knew I had a buck bedded in a great spot, I was really taking my time as best as I felt I could to get over there, making sure I didn't blow up something. It's putting yourself, it's putting in the work pre-hand. You don't need to be, this super physical specimen. You just have to be willing to kind of work hard and be in good enough shape that you can. I think a lot of guys, maybe in this scenario, look at a buck 2 miles across a canyon and go, I can't even get there today. That's not an option. And frankly, I didn't know if it was a 3 hour or a 6 hour ordeal. You just kind of look over there and go, man, that's a long ways away. I'm just going to start hiking and see how long it takes to get over there.
Yeah. That's the thing, though, is like you had the confidence of whether it was 3 hours or 6 hours that you could do it, right?
For sure.
And
yes.
That's a huge, huge factor, I think, in a lot of the physical preparation that gets overlooked. Is it's not about like the physicality of it. It's about building your own confidence to go, yeah, it's over there and it might take me a few hours, but I know I can do it. Versus a guy who hasn't trained, who might even be physically capable to do it, doesn't know that he can do it. He doesn't have the confidence that he can do it because he hasn't proved to himself that he can do something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you flash right back to the death hike right there.
Yeah, for
of,
sure. I mean, what's
let's go,
what's
let's
that
go
little
push
hike, right?
your, yeah, let's go push your limits and see what's possible. And something like, I knew that was 4+ miles, big deal. I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
Another thing, a little bit on strategy would be, I first thing in the morning before it was ever light, I had taken down my entire camp and it was loaded in my pack. And we've talked about that plenty of times, but truly bivvy hunting where you're tearing down camp every morning, I had no restrictions. Didn't matter where I ended up that night. I was just gonna hunt my way along. Versus, when we first started backpacking, we always set up a base camp, and it's very common to do so. I think your odds just go through the roof when you pack up camp every morning, because you have nothing holding you back.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could see, that's especially in country and you're in a new unit and you're not even sure where you need to end up, right?
Right.
I think it might be
sure.
one thing if you know that you have a good radius of animal density around you to hang out, sure. But yeah, even more so
absolutely.
with mule deer for sure. That's awesome.
Other than that, man, it's like, I feel like the perfect hunter is this perfect balance of, incredibly patient at times, but incredibly aggressive at other times. Sometimes you do have to just get somewhere, or sometimes you gotta get to a buck and sit there for 2 hours, or we've had bucks that we've sat on for 5-6 hours waiting for them to stand up. And a lot of guys I think would have a tough time, banking an entire day on when that deer stands up, you're going to get a shot. Maybe they'd push or rush a situation.
Yeah.
And it's hard to have that discipline to just sit there and wait and be patient. But I always talk about mule deer hunting, especially this early season high country stuff, as a chess match. I mean, it's basically you make a move, they make a move, you make a move, they make a move. You got to just kind of make a move and then wait to see what happens and let it play out and then adjust from there.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that key point you're talking about earlier of leapfrogging, back and forth between the ridge and then trying to find a good spot. It takes huge patience to, after the third time go, okay, screw it. It's either going to happen now or it's not, and maybe end up rushing it and blowing it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. That's super exciting. So is it at all bittersweet that your season's over after opening day, or you're just so used to that now? You're like, done, no big deal.
This may sound funny to some people. I'm not a trophy hunter. I've always, somewhere along the line, a couple years ago, I was like, man, I'm an experience hunter. I wanted to make a T-shirt with it. Like, we're not chasing inches, we're chasing experiences. And I'm tagged out, and I love being tagged out because that just means I'm going to go be there for Lenny and Tyler opening day and helping them hunt. And pressure's off for me. I just got to be there, just purely enjoying the experience with none of that stress of, actually having to kill the animal as far as making a good shot and recovery and stuff like that. So I'm super jacked. In Idaho, we can always buy a non-resident tag. So if both of them happen to tag out early, I might pick up a tag and just keep hunting or something like that. But then we'll roll right into elk season. So it's going to be, it's going to be an awesome September.
Yeah. That's super cool, man. No, next animal, you actually be there to high five someone versus,
yeah, high five the air next to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Solo hunting's tough. It's the guys who, I can do it for 3-4 days, but I'm not nearly badass enough to go out there for a week or something solo. That's just, holy cow.
That is a long time.
Yeah. The mental toughness it takes to do that and the dedication and stuff like that. That's a whole nother step up.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's a long time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, dude, that was so much fun hearing about it. Good lessons along the way, but just even hearing the story, which is something that you and I have talked about when listeners would love to get your feedback on. Steve and I have been talking about kicking around the idea of featuring not only guest interviews, but really just kind of getting guests on the podcast and telling a hunting story. And maybe we can, as hosts and co-hosts and really just listeners, dive into their story and ask some questions and pull some lessons out of it. But just really kind of capturing the essence, as you mentioned, the experience of the hunt and hearing about that on the show, as well as I think once you get deeper into a story, and you're not just trying to talk about a topic, you're not just trying to learn a lesson, it's really from the story you can get some of the best information. So, that's something that we've been talking about, and we'll probably be kicking off, this fall as seasons get rolling. So listeners, if that sounds good to you, definitely let us know. We'd love to hear if that's something that you're interested in, is more shows in the future based more around stories. So shoot us an email, podcast@exomountaingear.com. Not only tell us if that's a idea that you would be interested in, but any advice or any hunting stories out there that you would love to hear about. It'd just be cool to see that develop, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be really cool just to get people candid and just telling stories, because there's always, every good hunter is going to say, you learn something from every hunt, whether it's success or failure. And I think is for the listeners, and myself included, it's just another great opportunity to learn from other hunters on mistakes they made or things they did right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've all had those moments sitting around a campfire or whatnot where we get to share those hunting stories, and, let's recreate that with this podcast for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Steve, dude, congrats again, man.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Excited to see what happens through elk season, and as you mentioned, be hunting with the guys from the Pure Elevation crew. What's going on there? Or can we say, are you guys filming again this year? Any goals in mind, or just kind of wait and see how it goes?
We're selectively filming a little bit. We're definitely going to film some of our elk hunts. Filming's tough. It takes away from the enjoyment a little bit when you're in the moment, but it's also really fun to go back and watch once it's all said and done. So we last year we took a break, and this year, I don't think we're going to film any deer hunts, but we're definitely going to film some of our elk season, and hopefully you'll see us in the Full Draw Film Tour or something like that next year.
Very cool. And is everybody pretty much just hunting Idaho this year?
Yep, everyone's Idaho. Yeah, awesome. I don't think anybody's got any other tags or any plans.
Awesome. Cool, man. Well, thanks for the time, and we'll definitely catch you on the next episode.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
All right, see you, Steve.
See ya.